Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules today. As a matter of introduction, my name is Katie Fenton, and I am the EMEA Go-to-Market Lead for Threat Services here at Sentinel One. And I am honoured to welcome you to today's quarterly threat briefing. What we'd like to arm you with today is mission critical intelligence to ensure you are provided with not only a view into what our trusted experts are seeing, but also provide you with ways to strengthen your posture. In our recently released annual threat report, we found that with the utilization of AI as a force multiplier, the needle in the haystack advantage for defenders has been eliminated. So much so that we've seen organizations be exploited within hours. Add to the fact that in a recent IBM cost of a breach report, the average mean time to identify is 241 days. Keeping up to speed with ever evolving threat campaigns is more important than ever. As cyber threats continue to evolve, shaped by shifting geopolitical tensions, novel attack techniques, and increasingly complex environments, organizations face a rapidly changing landscape. Staying ahead now requires not just awareness, but practical insights and actionable guidance. So, in today's session, our panel of researchers and industry experts will cover the three main topics. First one, macro intelligence, giving you a global view of current campaigns and their impact on organizational risk. Second, regional adversary analysis, detailed breakdowns of tactics and techniques that are affecting you and your region. Lastly, the defensive playbook, so giving you practical recommendations to strengthen the defenses and shift from reactive patching to real proactive threat hunting. Today we have three wonderful presenters, and I am massively biased. So we've got the lovely Drea London. So Drea heads up our incredibly skilled incident readiness and response teams who do a phenomenal job to do not only assist our clients in unfortunate events, but also work with our clients for preparedness strategies. Second person is the wonderful Warwick Webb. So Warwick heads up and runs our managed detection and response service, which is currently protecting over 10 million endpoints, 24/7, 365 days of the year. And last but not least, the highly skilled Alex Delamotte. So Alex is one of our senior threat researchers at Sentinel Labs with over 10 years experience. Her role is to track the adversary behaviors in campaigns and help us keep up a good fight. But before we begin, a quick housekeeping note. Please submit any questions via the chat box throughout the session. I personally will answer as many questions as I possibly can, but if I'm unable to answer them, I'll ensure they're addressed post-webinar. With that, let's get started.
All right, so welcome everyone to our first ever quarterly threat briefing. And there we go. So I'll start. My name's Warwick Webb. I lead managed detection and response services here at Sentinel One. Drea?
Yeah, Drea London, nice to be here. So I lead our incident readiness and response services here at Sentinel One. And Alex?
Hi. Yeah. Hi, I'm Alex Delamotte. I'm a senior threat researcher on the Sentinel Labs team, where I focus primarily on cloud, Linux, Android, and more recently, LLM-enabled threats. Next slide. Thank you. Yeah, so I guess we'll jump right in with some information about what's been happening in the world from the geopolitical threat intelligence perspective. Obviously, there's been a lot of news since the start of the war in Iran with regard to how that's going to impact the cyber world. So far, some things that we've seen is that hacktivist groups such as Handala have been very active. And there was one attack where they had actually compromised a mobile device management platform used by the medtech company Stryker, which is a major partner of the UK's National Health Service. And the supply chain ended up being impacted by that due to some of the services being locked out, such as shipping logs and manufacturing interfaces. So there was a definite tangible real world element to this one. And there was a lot of chaos that was caused by it. And I think that this is the kind of attack that we see from Iran in general, when they're attacking organizations that are going to be fully disrupted, and it's going to impact the actual lives of the people in the area where they're targeting. Some of the other interesting things we've seen is there's ransomware as a service. The BQT Lock is targeting Western defense firms. So this was a RAS that was a kind of a smaller player, but they more recently pivoted into being an ideological one. And they have been doing attacks without enabling victims to pay for the data, where they've been just wiping the data in some cases. So this is another known technique for Iran. They've been long known for things like the Shamoon wiper, where data is destroyed. There's no opportunity to get it back or to negotiate. The goal is very clear in those cases. And lastly, there was recently a big event that had impacted the US in that Iran had, or Hadallah, a hacktivist persona, had hacked the personal email account of the FBI director in the United States and leaked some much older emails and photos. Honestly, it was nothing too salacious, but it's really showing a signal that they're willing to target people who they perceive as being adversarial or part of the conflict that they are opposing. Now, let's look at China. China, and especially their interest in Taiwan and the disputed nature of the territory, has long been a point of cyber conflict as well as real world. And we see kind of the impacts of both with actors like Volt Typhoon, where they're compromising energy grid infrastructure. They've been more active and they've been going after all kinds of different operational technology environments that would be disruptive to utilities. And as there's other conflicts going on, I think that there's an increased concern that this could be another area where we see threats and probably other types of action pop off. So it's definitely one to keep an eye on. Salt Typhoon has also been active, and they are a very persistent actor. They're the ones who are well known for establishing footholds in telecom networks. And the FBI recently had one of their directors speak, and they confirmed that they are still active in more than 80 countries and hundreds of victims. So organizations that have been targeted are still continuing to deal with this, and it is a major threat. They're very stealthy, and it's just something that has not been fully contained or eradicated. There was some legislation that was passed in the US recently where where there are no more sales of non-US manufactured networking devices such as routers that are designed to deter supply chain attacks that could occur from parts that were sourced and potentially compromised by Chinese actors. And another interesting update is that there were some sanctions against Chinese hack for hire groups, including Anshu Information Technology, which is also known as iSoon. And that came from the EU instead of the US or the more traditional Western entities, which are likely to do these kinds of sanctions. So it shows that Europe has become aware of the nature of this threat and that they are starting to take actions to defend against it. On the Russia front, there were some attacks in late December that were targeting critical infrastructure. And this is a long tried and true TTP for Russia. The Lazy Wiper and Dino Wiper instances had targeted electric plants in Poland. And while they were successful in infiltrating, they did not actually knock out the power, but it could have potentially impacted more than 500,000 customers or users of that power. So it really shows that they have demonstrated that they have that capability, and it should be a concern for anyone who could potentially be in their lens. Russia also was rather active recently and weaponized a zero-day vulnerability that turned into an end day within 24 hours of the vulnerability being announced, which kind of suggests that they probably didn't have the exact information to weaponize it previously and have gotten good at developing exploits based on the information that they had and probably new tools that are available. That was used to conduct some espionage campaigns on behalf of APT28. On the North Korea side, there were confirmed that there are more than 3,000 North Korean IT workers that have been hired in Western companies using largely deepfake string interviews or fake personas. And this used to be a problem that was discussed, I think, more widely in the United States and possibly Canada, but this is also impacting Europe. We've seen a lot more awareness and organizations being targeted over there. So the North Korean state is going to do anything that they can to fund their regime. And this has been a very lucrative opportunity for them, apparently. I think that's definitely going to continue. And as the AI tools only get better, it'll be more difficult to detect. But the good side is that there's growing awareness of it and efforts to deter it. There was also the usual targeting for North Korea is cryptocurrency. And apparently, according to some reports, they stole more than $2 billion in crypto last year, which is huge. Like, think of that from the perspective of like a company's recurring revenue. Like they are like a fairly decently positioned company, if not a highly sanctioned country. So it's just really interesting to think of it from that perspective. And they've been incredibly successful in these efforts. No sign of it slowing down. And one of the more interesting things, in my opinion, is that we have some more confirmed activity of North Korean state-aligned actors acting as ransomware affiliates. There were reports in the past few months that DPRK operatives were affiliates for several ransomware as a service, including Medusa, which was long suspected, but also confirmations of them being a Chilean affiliate. On the topic of regions being targeted, the United States and the Americas, there have been massive changes in the workforce and structuring of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency of the United States, which is very crucial as a player for many countries around the world in getting information and sharing information about cybersecurity issues and providing guidance and remediation. There's been a gradual reduction in the workforce, and since the government shutdown that started in February, it's going to be even more noticeable that there will be probably long-lasting impacts from these reductions in workforce. For European orgs, especially who have long collaborated with the US, this is going to be a change in paradigm because they're going to have to find other partners and ways to collaborate as the US capability is reduced. In Mexico, there was a campaign recently that leveraged LLM components. They jailbroke a Claude instance and actually were using that to target a Mexican government agency that covers the Federal Tax Authority, and it impacted as well Mexico City's Civil Registry and Health Department and the Monterrey Water Utility. So this really shows that Mexico is not by any means like offline, but they are still a developing area when it comes to cyber threat groups. Like, we don't have a whole lot of known directly established cyber threat actors who are entirely Mexico based or origined. So this is definitely one to watch because I think that this really indicates that people are aware of how to use technology that's advancing rapidly to further their hacking efforts. And we are seeing that activity happen in Mexico. I believe it was implied that they believed the actors were there, but it hasn't been directly attributed to a known group or individual at this time. On the European side, we covered a few things that impacted them when we were covering the threat actor regions, but there were several high-profile breaches to the European Commission in early 2026. The earlier one in February impacted their mobile device management platforms, which had a minimal impact. It did leak staff names and phone numbers, though, which potentially opens them up for a wide array of social engineering or pivoting into other accounts. So definitely not an ideal situation. More recently, there was a breach that was attributed to a cloud extortion actor where cloud service accounts belonging to the European Commission were targeted. And the data stolen included mail servers, databases, contracts. I believe there was a sample of that data posted, but definitely a high-profile breach and very concerning what kind of information could be in there. On the UK side, there was a very large breach affecting mostly London, but as it's the capital of the UK, this was rather crippling for some of the neighborhoods within. It was a local government service that was originated in November 2025, but remediation efforts took so long that local residents were unable to pay taxes and it impacted home sales, and there was just a really big fallout from that. On the Asia side, there have been a lot of speculation about retaliation regarding the war with Iran and the different perceived sides of the countries involved there. A lot of the activity that's been occurring, though, has really only been reported in the region as far as we've seen. That's not to say that there isn't more going on. There have been some social media campaigns that are suggesting to target South Korea, for example, because they're perceived as a Western ally. But really, the tangible impacts have stayed more focused, I think, on the traditional Western players. There was an announcement by the Singapore government in early 2026 that they had evicted a threat actor from their telecom infrastructure that was believed to be China aligned, and they had achieved fairly deep access, but not all the way infiltrated. And it's a really interesting shift in communications there because of the traditionally or historically close nature between those two countries. So it could signal a shift in the relationships going forward on cyber policy. When it comes to Africa, then, China, again, dominates a lot of their infrastructure. There's been a long historical precedent of China funding projects in Africa, and Huawei runs 70% of the mobile 4G infrastructure in Africa. And it's worth considering for organizations who have business in Africa that there is a risk for information there to be exposed. And it's a huge risk because we see other places like the European Union moving to block vendors that are perceived as posing a security risk. And more recently, there was a ransomware attack in South Africa on the statistics agency in Johannesburg, where there was a exfiltration of 4 terabytes of job applicant data. All right, we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So we're going to transition here and talk a bit about some of the trends that we've observed when going back over the incidents and the reports that we've all worked on here at SentinelOne over the past year. And there were a few categories that stood out to us as being particularly noteworthy. And I'll lead us off here with identity. This is something that's been on the forefront of pretty much every organization's mind, and it's only gotten more and more crucial. As time goes on, we have more identity data than ever, but the attacks are still harder to detect and to prevent. Every time that we get a new log source, it seems like there is another method for actors to abuse this for especially initial access and lateral movement, privilege escalation. There's just like such a wealth of techniques that can be achieved by compromising identity. So many ways to do it. One thing that stands out is software as a service identity trust is a huge vector that we've seen an increase in abuse of. Things like OAuth relationships to steal cloud or server credentials or to move deeper into the environment. Compromising identity control planes is another big one that we've seen an increase in. Threat actors are targeting devices, web applications, anything that could have privileged identity or security administrator credentials to, again, do lateral movement, pivoting, and achieve other objectives. This has only been increasing throughout the past few years, and it's really something that is becoming more and more evident. There were multiple intrusions where attackers access things like administrative portals for, say, web applications or servers, and then they disabled the MFA requirements for groups, which will make it much easier to do things like password stuffing and bypassing other credential moderation attempts. One more trend that we've observed is trusted access abuse, where actors are taking sessions and credentials to make things look more legitimate. This is something common in ecosystems like InfoStealers, where they will steal session cookies that are long-lived and reuse them over time, even though this has been likely taken from the machine at a much earlier point in time. Some websites don't have adequate security controls where they regularly rotate these sessions. So it's really important for organizations to consider that, which we'll get into then. The attack surface has really been expanding over time as well. In the identity world, there's more and more software designed to make life easier and to integrate more and more applications. I remember when Okta first became really big after the pandemic and other federated identity services, It was kind of a niche thing or like a luxury to have that. And now it's kind of commonplace. I want to say most organizations are using some kind of federated identity service, and almost every application they would want to integrate with supports it in most cases. So this makes so many more attack surfaces and just threat vectors for actors to get into an environment and do bad.
Yeah, so I think that leaves it up to me to have less exciting stories to tell than Alex for sure. But looking at how all of this stuff manifests, and even just that mention of Okta and federated identity, and I've gotten to a point now where I get on my Okta page and I have so many little, what are they called, chiclets, that I have to scroll or search to find access to whatever application I need because it's that attack surface is just so vast. So, looking at this, it's something we've been saying for years and years and years. I really don't mean, like, what I'm about to say, guys, is like not revolutionary. I'm not gonna wow your socks off, but like same stuff we've been saying all along, which is, we have to assume breach. We have to start looking at attackers is behaving like normal users, right? Which is what we're seeing, whether it's remote management applications, whether it's the access to administrative accounts, trusted relationships, like B2B, business to business relationships with trusted access is and has been for some time like a huge threat to us. So like how do we start to detect and prevent and respond to that? And it's really getting away from the strategy of looking at events and moving to a strategy of like sequences. How do we look at user behavior? And it is so much easier said than done. I mean, it is the same kind of paradox of asset management and things that like we've all been trying to figure out for a really, really long time. But when you start looking at user behavior, and instead of deciding that we're going to prevent something, finding capabilities and methodologies to disrupt something quickly. And I think once we get to that point, we're all going to you know, hopefully sleep a little better, because the amount of pressure to prevent things these days it's just not achievable. So I think that's what we're trying, we're really starting to see is this manifestation of what we've been talking about years and years and years, which is threat actors look normal. And even with very sophisticated telemetry, even with very sophisticated tooling, there's just too much information to prevent any of that behavior anymore. But I do think it comes down to, like I said, looking at sequences. We can talk about UEBA, and I mean, a few years ago, everybody's like, "Oh yeah, UEBA," and it's so immature. Like, well, we're getting there now, right? And I think that's where the focus is for the responder today, and that's what I get to bring to the table in this conversation. So, with that said, I will hand it right back.
Yeah, the next thing we're going to look at is infrastructure, which has been a known weak point. I think the first time that I specifically remember staying up at night worrying about infrastructure was probably the SolarWinds attacks, when edge devices there were backdoored by a state-aligned actor, and we all got spun up right before Christmas. I'm sure a lot of people remember that. We're seeing so much more of that now, and one of the interesting trends that I am observing as someone on the research side, now granted, I don't see all of the intrusions that someone might see like on the DFIR side, like Drea, but what I'm seeing on the research side is before, when we saw these types of attacks, they were primarily China aligned and state aligned adversaries. They were the ones really taking advantage of enterprise edge devices. And now we're seeing a lot of lower level threat actors, lower tiered, lower skilled, and they are now using these exploits that were traditionally used by actors aligned with much more sophisticated groups and funding. So some of the ways that this can manifest is that there are lots of assets on networks in many organizations that are typically not well documented. So having a very good asset inventory is way more important, I think, than having robust policies that prevent shadow IT. Just understanding what is on your network is going to be so much more helpful than having a blanket policy to not do a thing. Because people are probably going to do it either way. And at least then you're able to understand what the exposure and the footprint is. We've seen that the exploitation timelines for vulnerabilities in this type of device have really accelerated. And a lot of that is likely due to both more sophisticated automation, which is, of course, enabled partially by AI. The rise of AI has given that skill to or given this ability to lower skilled actors who probably wouldn't have been able to put together a massive campaign leveraging these types of exploits. One of the examples was ShadowPad, which is a China-aligned adversary, exploited checkpoint gateway vulnerabilities to compromise more than 70 organizations in the last year. And some of those vulnerabilities were weaponized within days of disclosure. Now, of course, that is a sophisticated and well-funded adversary. They've done supply chain attacks before. They're notorious. But in this case, it was something that we're also seeing happen with lower skilled actors, just the rapid weaponization of vulnerabilities. So edge device compromise is also a really good way for actors to get both a deeper foothold into the network and to elevate privileges, lateral movement. It really just provides so many opportunities, and that makes them really attractive targets to a variety of actors. A lot of these devices have credentials that are stored inside of them so that they can adequately manage and monitor things like identity events. We investigated an event at SentinelOne recently where FortiGate appliances were compromised by several different actors, but both of the activities were suggestive, in my opinion, of pre-ransomware activity. And there was like a varying degree of sophistication with how they proceeded with the next steps. But I think this is really a bellwether of what we're going to be seeing more and more, because right as we were researching that, AWS actually put out a report from their security team about a massive campaign where they knew that LLM development was involved in rapidly implementing a campaign to target FortiGate devices en masse. The activity didn't look like what we saw, but that means that there's like at least 3 actors, probably way more, that are thinking about this type of threat. Next, please.
All right, so I'll jump in and talk about this a little bit from the defender's perspective. And going back to what Drea said earlier, there's nothing particularly mind-blowing about what we're going to talk about here. We've all known that securing the perimeter has been important for many, many years. The way I look at it is we'll stop talking about these risks when we stop seeing them exploited on a regular basis. And the reality is that when we investigate, incidents from an MDR perspective, it's often the case that the initial attack vector was through a perimeter device, right? And so going through sort of eating your vegetables, we've referred recently to this threat report as really being about eating your vegetables, right? The stuff that just may not be exciting, but it's super, super important. The first focus area here is eliminating legacy risk, right? So it's not a sexy topic, but attack surface management is critically important. Often where we see a vulnerable edge device used as the initial entry point during a breach, the victim organization, more often than not, was not even aware that that device was exposed to the internet, right? To Alex's, I think, comment earlier about sort of asset inventory being super important. So that's the first step is, again, understanding your perimeter, whether that's a traditional like on-prem perimeter or obviously your cloud infrastructure. Do you understand all the services there? Do they absolutely need to be there? Do they absolutely need to be fully exposed? If they don't, take them off the offline, obviously. If they do, if there's a valid business case for a device to be exposed to the internet, either because it's maybe a VPN ingress device or it's a proxy out to the internet, or some other remote access service. Two remaining recommendations here. First of all, instrument it heavily, right? We usually can't put EDR agents on network appliances for the most part, but telemetry from these devices can be really, really valuable for a defender to detect and quickly contain compromises. So, for example, when vulnerabilities in network infrastructure are disclosed by a vendor, those vendors often share specific details about how the exploitation of those vulnerabilities might manifest in the log data, right? And in those cases, whether it's your organization or something we would do at SentinelOne, would be build new detection logic to detect evidence of exploits just from the log data that's coming off of those devices. So again, ship log data to a central location where you can build detections, or you have a partner that's building detections. The second example there, not specific to a vulnerability, but if you're at least logging the authentication activity for an edge device, you can look for unusual authentication attempts. And also, if you're logging network traffic from this device, you can look for unexpected network connections from the device into your internal environment. And then on that note, containing the blast radius is important. Again, nothing new, but network segmentation is a thing. And generally speaking, an edge device should not need to be able to connect to every single resource within your organization. There are always exceptions to that, but generally speaking, you should heavily restrict traffic from edge devices into the internal network, because those are obviously commonly used as pivot points for an attacker. Get access through that edge device and then start moving laterally. So those are the vegetables that we all need to eat on the edge decay side of things. All right, what do we got next? Oh,
Can I
Trey, you want to add something? Yeah,
Yes, I do, because I
please.
love talking about the like age-old problem of asset inventory, by the way. Like for a while I was, working at an enterprise as a cybersecurity executive, and that was my problem, right? Like it is not, I just want to say, like, we know that's not an easy problem to solve. And it should be on everybody's risk register. Just like doesn't matter how mature you think you are, like that is a constant thing that everybody should evolve and pay attention to. But it's also not just about the devices, it's about the applications that are living on them and identifying not just the physical appliance, but like everything that's running on the appliance. And again, nothing shocking here, not like dropping religion on anybody, but it is really important to put the two together, and then measure like, what does that mean to you as an enterprise? And if it's completely unknown, like that's obviously the biggest concern. If it's something that you have to acknowledge, you acknowledge it. But the two go hand in hand.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. And I was noticing that both of your comments really tie into some of the campaigns that we've seen recently where people just don't have sufficient information to investigate. And what we're seeing with edge devices is, again, a lack of logging, not having it uploaded centrally, and not having an adequate asset inventory on things like software versioning. So, really, that drives it home. Excellent.
Yeah, on that point, I can't tell you the number of times that our team has been investigating a breach that's very, very deep inside an organization's network, and they're following the steps back, and then they get to this IP address. Well, what is this? It's not an endpoint that we recognize. It's not a server. It often turns out to be one of those edge network appliances, and that's where the trail kind of stops. So,
Well,
yep.
we're starting to see it go to the cloud now too. I don't want to like you know distract from the fact that we have many more topics here, but it was not very long ago that my team was investigating an incident where we worked our way back to a cloud endpoint, and it was a very, very deep, very, very disturbing threat that came from a vulnerable coupon application on a cloud device, right? So how do you asset inventory that? I mean, it's going to be, but it is important, and again, not to make light of it, but that's where we are these days. It's a very complex landscape. There's a lot of stuff going on. I'm sure that coupon was probably important to somebody, right? But it was obviously unawares to all of the folks that had to respond to the incident. So here we are. Carry on. Sorry, Alex.
No, you're good. I want to know more about that coupon. That's wild. Cloud is one of my favorites, but it's also just a different and complex attack surface. So, next slide, please. I think we're going to touch on something kind of related here. Yeah. living off the pipeline. So this was something we noticed in the trends from over the past year is that like CI/CD targeting is nothing new. I used to be on a cloud offensive security team, and I'm very familiar with the value that comes from compromises that are based on exactly that. It seems like threat actor focus has increasingly targeted this, given that endpoints, which used to be such a ripe initial access environment, are generally better secured at this point. They're just less easy to get to and also pivot and do the deep things that you would want to do to get deeper in the environment. It makes a whole lot more sense to spend your effort on compromising things that have sufficient and significant access. And pipelines are definitely one of those. So software pipelines, of course, are a high value target because they're doing things like taking code in, which could be proprietary intellectual property, and they have privileged accounts to be able to deploy it to different systems, and they're integrated within the environment. So that's why that's going to continue to be a high value target, but it's a little bit of a, I think, a lesser known or lesser understood for attack space for defenders who probably lived in the traditional enterprise or endpoint environment. So it is something that we just want to raise awareness for. There have been a couple campaigns over the past year. There was a campaign with Team City servers that were deploying a backdoor through a trusted build agent that was running with system permissions. So again, pipelines are running with highly privileged permissions, and they often have the ability to push things to many different systems. Kind of similar to an MDM, but of course it's not managing endpoint devices, it's pushing code to various servers. And infrastructure is naturally required to host CI/CD pipelines. So it's an increasing trend that, of course, code is going to be introduced through the build pipelines. There were a few different instances where that happened, and it continues to happen. It's something that you might see where there are weaponized infrastructure as code templates. That can be a way to do so. And definitely something that you want to have a robust solution monitoring for, although we'll get into the defender's perspective soon. Social engineering campaigns in this space have definitely ramped up. They've become much larger, and it really ties into the identity item that we discussed earlier. So there's a lot of ways for bad actors to achieve access to infrastructure or CI/CD or even do software supply chain compromise. North Korean adversaries are increasingly doing this and trying to target developers, for example, to get them to run weaponized payloads on their system through fake job interviews, which is something we saw in Contagious Interview. And there's just been a lot of different campaigns that are leveraging this, like the XC backdoor was another one. And that was when the XC binary that was on pretty much every Linux system pushed malicious version or potentially pushed a malicious version, but it was identified by a key developer before that went live. So this is something that we're seeing time and time again. People are realizing that it works. And another angle that is worth mentioning is the supply chain being compromised through poison dependencies. So we've seen a lot of cases where the logic is introduced into trusted ecosystems through compromised accounts or commits that are pushed through those. One example is recently there was a very noisy new cloud threat actor that's been targeting all kinds of different services that pushed a weaponized version of a vulnerability scanner into the cloud. And it had a massive effect because it actually had credentials belonging to another organization. And they achieved this attack apparently by using intended normal features where they initiated a pull request that somehow managed to use the secrets that were in the environment and send them back to the threat actor. So there are so many different angles for the CI/CD pipeline and these types of attacks that are just not exactly intuitive or widely known when it comes to configuration. And it's really important to have a really good resource or experts who are aware of all of the different parts of your CI/CD tech stack that you're using. Next slide.
I think it's interesting to look at the CI/CD pipeline as being a vulnerability for an entire enterprise in a way we haven't really looked at it. So we look at this as, okay, we could introduce a vulnerability. And I think that we as a community or an industry has evolved enough to start identifying vulnerability is, and we've identified capacity and impact of vulnerabilities with scoring and things like that. But when we really look at the fact that software in itself can be the entire attack vector. I mean, I used to work at a software company. Obviously, I can't say who it was, but we were on 82% of endpoints in the whole world. And I remember being as like the leader of incident response at that company, thinking the entire time, holy crap, if something happened in our software and we didn't know, what could this do? Right? So we have to recognize that impact, and we have to start looking at the fact that even if it's something as simple as like DLL sideloading or whatever, this stuff is impactful and it's important. And it goes back to the same stuff we were talking about before. Looks like normal human behavior, very difficult to detect and very difficult for us to prevent. So disruption is what's most important. Looking at the metrics of the life cycle, paying attention to, how we you look at developers as specific high value targets and high value users, right? Like we have to prioritize, right? We can't look at everybody as equal. And it's very easy to think, okay, well, my E staff, my C levels, these are all my important users. But really, your developers are the most impactful and capable users, and their accounts, their privileged access, their trusted relationships are all the biggest vulnerabilities when not maintained, measured, or protected. So all of this stuff is stuff we've known, like I said, for a while. I mentioned it before. It's nothing like earth-shattering. In fact, software development lifecycle is not my greatest skill, but I will say what I see day to day is a fear of what that sort of access and privilege could turn into. So same stuff, like I said, that we've been working on for a few years. Into everything that Alex said, we are starting to see an evolution of those things actually happening these days. AI is not helping us get there. I mean, it is getting the threat actor there, but it's really continuing to just evolve into threat actors being able to cloak their own behavior in normal user access. So.
Yeah, it's definitely scary. Kind of some of the things you touched on where AI is enabling threat actors to just do this even more effectively is something that we've observed. If we can go to the next slide. Yes. So AI is obviously, I think, the biggest single impact that we've seen from the rise in adoption and capabilities of LLMs is that the scale and volume of attacks are just so much larger. Everything is happening faster. It's happening more. It's probably more actors in the space who wouldn't have been doing the types of attacks they were doing before, probably sticking to something lower skilled. It's definitely expanding pretty much every surface that we're looking at. And things like scanning, escalation of privilege, lateral movement, it's all happening way faster and just at a scale that we haven't seen before. And it's really a challenge for defenders to catch up. That's what we touched on the last item here. The human bottleneck is that manual response really cannot keep up with the attackers and the scale and just the increase in probably even new actors who are doing this. So one anecdote for that, which isn't even like a cyber thing, I've noticed that developers who I've never seen have an interest in cyber are suddenly interested in bug bounty. And, they want to do it for legitimate purposes, but I can only imagine that when these are people who have just, worked in a regular dev job traditionally, there's going to surely be interest in other cyber and bad actors who are picking up these types of hobbies, and just increasingly it's exposing more of the world to cybersecurity than previously would have had interest or skill to do so. But
So Alex, I have a question about that because
yeah,
you mentioned bug bounty and like what is I see the concept of bug bounty. We've all participated in this, and it's really supposed to monetarily like influence folks to hopefully at the end of the day help you out, right? And it could be a whole job for people. Like folks could just do that for a living and like be very, very um, well compensated. Do you think we ever saw that actually happen?
honestly, I don't. Because I mean, from the perspective of the people I've seen pick up the recent interest, they talk about going into it and getting into it and learning like, kind of the chops involved, but I haven't actually seen a whole lot of success there. I would say the exception might be people who are more into like the very deeper parts of getting to understand the CLIs and the AI coding agents. I have seen some other people from different domains excel there, but when it comes to just people like picking it up as hobbyists, I haven't seen anyone get a CV quite yet. But
Do you think that's
I'll
what
have
we
to keep
want?
following.
Like this concept, was that what we were hoping and striving for? Or is this just, I mean, I got the concept is help us out, right? But like,
Right.
I think the utopian idea behind it at the beginning was, well, we got these guys that like could do naughty things or they could now do good things. And I just don't know that I necessarily see that. But it's also very complex, right? We're talking about multiple applications, multiple appliances, network versus endpoint, all of that stuff. So I think it's kind of like hard to put everybody in one box. But I've just sort of, I don't know. I've always thought that. What is have we achieved this? Was this what we wanted? I don't know. Interesting.
No, I mean, it's a good question. I think it is an individual basis thing, but overall, I don't know if there's been the return on investment that we would have hoped.
Cool. Sorry to
Yeah,
distract.
no worries. No, you're good. Um, yeah, so let me see. We did want to touch on a few things here. One really interesting example of scale and AI technologies being integrated to just really make something way more ridiculous than it should have been before was the AkiraBot campaign, which I researched last year along with my colleague Jim. And we saw this spam campaign that was like just one of the like less impactful things. They were spamming website contact forms with a referral to a low quality search engine optimization service. But we got logs from these tools and they did like 80,000 successful attempts, more than 400,000 overall attempts. And these were unique results. We deduplicated them. So that's like unique websites. I didn't even look at the scale of the logs before the deduplication, but that's 400,000, like probably small business websites that were spammed with custom AI generated content, trying to advertise this SEO service to them that probably wouldn't have done much good. And the chat GPT credits involved had to cost so much money. It just really makes me wonder about like the financial incentive there and how it could be something worth automating on that scale. So I think that we're going to keep seeing more attacks like that, where stuff is just kind of like, why is this being done at scale? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I feel like it's the tip of the iceberg, and we're just going to keep seeing more and more tools that are using AI to make generated content and do things en masse. So we can go to the next slide.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about, we know now that attackers are moving at machine speed. So as defenders, how can we possibly keep up? Well, the first thing, automating response. So time to contain definitely matters, more so now than ever. So automating that initial containment of well understood threats is super, super important. If you look at our kind of technology model, we have, endpoint technology that's fully autonomous that can identify and take containment actions against a wide range of known threats. That's obviously where you want to stop most of the attack activity is automatically in milliseconds. So that's sort of the first start and first part of it. And then It's not just endpoint prevention, though. You can also use SOAR or the industry has now called hyperautomation technology to implement sort of, uh, response actions in the cloud on the cloud side, not just on the endpoint, and encode your specific business logic into that. So, for example, if an alert has these specific characteristics and it involves this environment, then you should take this action. If not, don't take that action. So, just automating as much of the kind of known threats as possible is an important step. And then sort of related to that is just overall reducing the amount of manual effort that's being performed by defenders. Automation should no longer be, a bad word. Any SOC or any managed service that's not using automation, AI, hyperautomation heavily is wasting their time on signals that don't matter. The reality is that, the amount of sort of signals in your environment will always be greater than the amount of time that your team or your managed services partner has to review all that activity. So in some ways, threat detection is kind of like a risk management exercise. You need to decide where you want your team to focus their time and energy. And for the other signals, you really need to automate those away. So, just because a security product generates an alert doesn't mean that your team is obligated to look at that alert. You have to evaluate that specific type of detection and say, is this worth my team's time? And in many cases, you can either fully automate these signals or at least partially automate the investigation of the activity, so that when it arrives in front of a human, most of the work is already done. So, our MDR team, for example, uses a combination of our hyperautomation and our agentic AI to either partially or fully automate the investigation of high volume, lower fidelity alerts. And again, it's not so they can just kick back and relax. It's so that they have more time to focus on those signals, on that activity that is potentially the most impactful. And then, it's not obvious here, but this is actually somewhat related with the speed at which attackers are sort of evolving their TTPs, right, their tactics, and also their attacker infrastructure, their network infrastructure is constantly changing, and so often relying on brittle kind of detections for known TTPs or known indicators of compromise isn't sufficient. And so, we certainly recommend that you also leverage the AI capabilities out there to perform hunting, whether that's sort of natural language, just interacting with your data lake as you can with our Purple AI product to kind of explore the data and look for unusual activity. In the case of our managed services, our Wayfinder threat hunters, we actually have ML models that are running that are looking for any slightly anomalous activity in the environment. These are too noisy to be alerts, but our threat hunters kind of hunt across those signals that are surfaced by ML models, and from there look for sort of the unknown, right? Attacks that we're not yet aware of. So those are just a few kind of tips for keeping up with attackers moving at machine speed.
I think that's really interesting work. Like, I also think if you look back, like we've been doing this for some time and talk about how like tuning a SOAR platform or SIEM or whatever has like always been a challenge for everybody. And now the ability to use AI to really distill that down and make it more and more intelligent is, I mean, it is like a really impactful evolution, I think,
Totally.
in where we are. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the way we think about it is sort of AI is eating the sort of security operations from the bottom up, right? Just a lot of that really high volume, low value work is being taken care of by agentic AI, and again that just we know that there's so much else that we could be focused on, so many other signals we could be investigating, and it just frees us up to do that and improves our ability to detect and respond to threats. So it's an exciting time. All right, so hopefully you enjoyed our webinar today. We really just kind of scratched the surface of those 8 major themes in our annual threat report. So please download it, check it out. And again, thank you for your time today.